Now, here's one issue with giving Israel this challenge to either choose to be a Jewish state or a democratic state, cannot be both. We've already seen how the U.S. government treats countries in the Middle East that allow a secular society to flourish. For instance, they took out Gaddafi, they took out Saddam Hussein, and now they're attempting to take out Assad. Iran as well allows Jews, Christians, Muslims to just live freely in their country. They are a secular society. In fact, the U.S. government seems to only allow non-secular societies like Saudi Arabia to flourish. They're okay. They're not going to mess with them. So I double dog dare John Kerry to tell Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan to be more democratic and not rule by their faith. For instance, in Afghanistan, a woman was beheaded because she dared to go shopping without her husband or without a close male relative of the family. And of course, we see stuff like that happening. People are calling for the beheading of a woman in Saudi Arabia who dared go outside and go shopping without her headscarf on. So here, this is where we're seeing a total double standard in the Middle East. This is also just further evidence of a globalist pivot to Islam. It's not about ideology or who's right or wrong. It's more so about latching to an exploding population. As we know, the Muslim population is exploding.
Hey, Nehemiah, things are really happening on a not only in Israel front, but on a worldwide scale right now that takes us right back to Israel's past. Tell us, what is going on?
Well, just recently we had a speech from Secretary of State John Kerry, and this was following a decision at the United Nations to condemn 500,000 Israelis as war criminals. And what they did is, in 1967, Israel liberated what the world calls the West Bank and Gaza, and there are 500,000 Jews living in what the world calls the West Bank. We actually don't recognize it as the West Bank. We call it Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem. I mean, we're talking about the old city of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter. They're calling occupied territory. The Western Wall, the world is telling us that me going to pray at the Western Wall is a war crime. And this is something that the world's been trying to condemn Israel with for decades. And the United States has always, as part of the alliance that the U.S. and Israel have, has always vetoed it. Well, Obama decided that he was not going to veto it. And there's some talk that he was actually behind the scenes engineering this. But in any event, it's unprecedented in the modern era. Although if we go back in history, this has happened time and again. It's unbelievable that we're actually having these conversations today in 2016. And these are the conversations that were going on in ancient times. We're just coming to the end of Hanukkah, and this actually happened in the historic Hanukkah. I mean, almost word for word what's going on today. It's unbelievable, Michael.
Now, I want to step back. I want you to take us back in history on this, but I'm going to tell you a little bit, ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to hear tonight, because I make this statement. I said, if you think that a Muslim is going to leave office quietly, you have got another thought coming. We are going to watch what Obama and what the Pope do during Hanukkah and Purim this year. Now we're seeing exactly what Obama has done during Hanukkah. This is an absolute, we are going to see prophecy repeat itself. Nehemiah, tell us what happened over 2,000 years ago.
Well, so Michael, in the original Hanukkah, the story that I grew up with, what I was told, is that in 168, Antiochus IV tried to stamp out Judaism, and then 3 years of bitter fighting, and the Jews defeat the Greeks, and everybody lives happily ever after the liberation of the temple in 165 BC with the first Hanukkah. That's not what happened, Michael. If you read in 1 and 2 Maccabees, the war continued for decades. And in fact, it wasn't until 141 BC, under the brother of Judah the Maccabee, whose name was Simon, that they finally drove the Greeks out of the garrison. There was a Greek garrison in the heart of Jerusalem, in the spot that in ancient times, even earlier, there was the fortification of David, what's called the City of David. Mm-hmm. And it's incredible because last year the archaeologists finally published what they've been uncovering for the last nearly 15 years, which was this, what's known in history as the Acra, or the Acropolis of the Greeks. That was the Greek garrison in the heart of Jerusalem. We're told in Jewish sources that Jews couldn't go to the temple during the day because the Greeks would fire arrows at them or throw feces at them. They had to go at night, so the Greeks couldn't see them. So imagine this, in the heart of Jerusalem, there is this foreign entity, this acropolis, this foreign fortification, and it takes them 35 years from 34 years from 165 to 141. They've liberated the temple, but they can't go to the temple during the day because they'll get shot at. And it isn't until 141 that Simon finally drives the Acra out. Well, then 7 years later, he gets a letter from Antiochus VII, who is one of the heirs of Antiochus IV. And Antiochus VII writes as follows. He says, "You hold control of Jaffa and Gezer and the citadel of Jerusalem." Citadel of Jerusalem, read that as East Jerusalem, because that's literally what he's talking about. He's talking about the city of David in East Jerusalem. So you hold control of Jaffa, Gezer, and East Jerusalem. They are cities of my kingdom. And then he says, "Hand over the cities that you have seized, that you have conquered outside the borders of Judea." Wait, East Jerusalem is outside the borders of Judea? "Or else pay me 500 talents of silver for the destruction that you've caused, and 500 talents more for the tribute of the cities. Otherwise, we will come and make war on you." So he's saying in no uncertain terms, this is Antiochus VII, the Greek heir of Antiochus IV, who's saying, "Give me land or there will be war." You know, when we hear this term, I've been hearing this term since I was a little kid, land for peace. If we just gave them another piece of land, there'd be peace.
Right.
Just one more piece of land. Well, in 2005, Israel pulled out the last Jew from Gaza, and all we've had since then is war. I actually just did a podcast episode on my Hebrew Voices series called City of Rockets, in which I documented. I went to people who don't speak a word of English, and I said, what's been going on here for the last 10 plus years? And it was heartrending to hear some of the stories of how the Jews of Sderot, which is a city on the border of Gaza, have been living. And what we got instead of land for peace is we got land, and in exchange we got war. And now the world is demanding, you've got to give back this land that you seized. And
it's literally land or war is what they're saying now.
Absolutely. It's the same words. It's unbelievable. It's literally the same words that were spoken in 134 BC that are going on today in 2016. And then Simon's reply could be a letter that Netanyahu sent today to John Kerry. It says, this is in 1 Maccabees 15:33. This is in a study I have online. It's called War Without End. And it's quoted from 1 Maccabees 15. "Simon said to him in reply," this is to Antiochus VII, "we have neither taken foreign land nor seized foreign property, but only the inheritance of our ancestors, which at one time had been unjustly taken by our enemies." That's unbelievable. Simon says this in 134 BC to Antiochus VII. It could be Netanyahu writing a letter to John Kerry and saying, you're calling us war criminals for going and praying at the Western Wall in a sovereign Jewish state? This is the land of our ancestors, which was unjustly taken by our enemies. You want us to give it over to our enemies now? That makes no sense to anybody in the world. This is really unprecedented in the modern era, but if you go back to ancient times, Michael, this is the par for the course, where the nations of the world say, you Jews can't live in that area because you're Jews. Yeah. My ancestors, Michael, 150 years ago, lived in a place in Eastern Europe, in what was the Russian Empire, and they established something called the Pale of Settlement. And the idea of the Pale of Settlement is Jews can only live in certain areas that we designate. They're trying to establish a Pale of Settlement today in our homeland. We're Jews. Jews come from Judea. It's unbelievable. It's shocking. It really is disappointing.